Everyone, it's machine embroidery today, so you've all put your felt away and we're going to get going on beginner's machine embroidery. I know some people will have done it before, but I'm just going to take you right from the start, from the basics, so that those who've never done it before will have a good chance to do it. So, without further ado, onto the sewing machine and onto the table. So, before you start, you need to have an embroidery hoop, and it needs binding with tape, and it's also useful if it's the one of the kind that has a screw on it. So the binding is to give the fabric a really good grip, and because we're only practicing, I'm not going to use felt because felt is quite another thing to stitch on, and we'll get onto that later. I've got this thick, it's like a thick canvas, it's called artist canvas or cotton duck, and it's very resilient and it's also quite thick. So you put it over the top of your the outer part of the hoop, because you want the sewing surface to be down on the base of the machine. And then you put your bound piece inside it, and it has to be as tight can be. So when you put it in, stretch it as tight as you can, because you don't want the material moving about while you're trying to sew. You want it to stay absolutely flat. After a while, I mean, when we get to stitch on the felt, we don't really use a ring, but this is just to get you into the way of doing it. Now, that's the hoop ready, and you can hear it sort of almost like a drum. So that's ready for you. Another little trick I need to tell you is that this foot on my sewing machine has a sort of graded pressing range, really, so it doesn't just suddenly go down to the bottom and take off. If yours hasn't, I think you could. I just thought of an idea. I'm sure I've seen it before anyhow. You could maybe tape very tightly a piece of foam around there, so that when you do come to press, it's going to take a bit more pressing than just one that's, you know, hasn't got much of a range from top to bottom, because you don't really want to be going too fast. I'll just put that back down on the floor. Crash, bang, oops. The tripod now. Now also, right, I'll tell you how to get the machine ready first. I won't go on to the alsos until we've done the only. I'll just move the camera. Now my machine at the moment is set up for ordinary straight stitching, where these little, where these little teeth underneath move the fabric along. Now you need to get rid of that for machine embroidery, and on this machine it's dead easy. All you have to do, I'll just take that off for a second. All you have to do is turn this knob, and this really is why I bought this Bernina machine, because it's dead easy, and I do loads and loads of machine embroidery. I have another machine for dressmaking if I ever decide to make dresses. I don't do anymore since pattern sizing is a little issue. The last pattern I bought, it said measure your height and your width to find out which pattern size to cut. And when I measured my height, I was a size 8, and when I measured my width, I was a size 20, so I just threw it away, gave up. Anyhow, I've dropped the feed now, and the other thing we need to do is put on a different foot. Now, some machines, I know that Janome machines have rather a complicated system of removing this, but again, this is the Bernina, and it's really easy, and it just lifts a little lever and off that comes. Now, some people do free machine embroidery without a foot on, and I don't advise that. If you haven't got a darning foot, well, that's your decision or your lookout, really, because even with the darning foot on the other day, I don't know if you can see that little black dot, I actually stitched through my finger. Actually, fortunately, it wasn't through my finger, it was just through my fingernail. So here's my darning foot. The Bernina ones are very expensive, and I was looking with great covetousness the other day at one with a really big hoop. And you can also get some that have a sort of cup-shaped thing on, so they keep everything flat while you're sewing. So anyway, I put this on. So it goes on very, very easily in the Bernina. Again, you'll have to look in your instruction book and see how to do it. Now, if your sewing machine hasn't got the possibility of dropping the feed, there is another thing that you can do. I'll just put the sewing table back on first, and then I can work with it. This is quite useful. Another little thing you can do, and I have tried it with someone and shown it to them, is on this little piece of card here, yes you can see, I've made a hole that's just as big as the place where the needle goes in. It covers up the teeth, and I could tape that on there very firmly and securely. That's really important to tape it on. Obviously, if you have a machine where you have to take the top off to put the spool in and out, that's going to be a bit of a nuisance, but you know, all is not lost if you have this system. And if you do that, then you have to set your stitch length to 0 down here or wherever you set your stitch length, because you don't want, you know, you don't want it to be trying to move your fabric along. So that is a possibility. Another way of doing it is with a sort of credit card, well, or not an embossed one, because that would cause problems, but one of those, something made like a credit card, club membership card or something. But it's only small, and then you have bumps and things. So if you do use one of those, you could also cut a shape with a credit card shaped hole round it in mount card and put that over it, so you get a nice flat surface to stitch on. Anyhow, I don't have to worry about that, fortunately, because that's not a problem here. I've got the ability, and I hope that most of you have got a machine that can do free machine embroidery, because it's great fun. So I'm going to start now machine embroidering. I've put the fabric with the hoop in position, and I'm going to start by bringing the bottom thread upwards. So I'm sure you all know how to do that. If you're sewers, go down into the fabric once and back up again, keeping the other end of the thread in your hand and just gently pulling, and at some point that thread that you've got hold of will pull the underneath thread through. So pull them both through. Now at the moment that's at the top of the hole for the darning foot, but I think I'd start with them underneath. Now I'd also start with, don't forget, you've got to put the lever down as well, even if you're doing it without a foot on, you've still got to put the lever down for the tension. Start with the needle in the fabric, very gently start to stitch. And I'm just moving the fabric slowly, and I'm not panicking, but the needle's going quite quickly. So if you wanted to have stitches that were a little bit longer and a bit more stitch-like, press more gently on the foot underneath and move your fabric a little bit more quickly. I'll show you. Now I'll trim off this edge here and practice for a long time. Practice till you become really competent with machine embroidery and making the stitches go where you want them to. So you're moving the fabric, you're not moving, obviously you can't move the machine, and you're just drawing using your machine as using machine needle as your drawing tool. Just practice a few things like spirals and little patterns like this. If you want to go really fast, move your fabric a little bit more quickly, because otherwise you'll end up with a big clump of fabric. Now because I'm using very fine thread and quite thick fabric, I mean thick woven fabric, it's a bit, the line isn't as smooth as it should be. I'm just having a bit of fun here, just stitching. Any way you like, just practice doing little curves, and because your fabric's in a hoop, the tension is perfect. I've seen a lot of girls at college using thin fabric without a hoop, and you end up with a curly, horrible mess. Then again, you know, if that's the effect they want, that's fair enough. So you can see that the line is a little bit jagged simply because of the thickness of the linen. It's not linen, cotton fabric. So you can pull your ends through to the back, and that is basic machine embroidery. Now you can can change colours, you can use other fabrics, you can use other threads. Now a little word about threads. I like these. They're called Natesh Titania. Oops, let's put them where you can see them. Oh, let's move the camera so that you can see them better, that's it. They come in lovely shades, and I always buy the variegated ones. I'll change in a minute to show you. And they're available from a company called Silken Strands in North Wales, and they're very good, and she does say she will ship abroad if you want. They're not terribly expensive. These are made really well, and they tend not to snap. But I have had some much cheaper ones that have a much bigger hole in the middle of here, so there's actually, they look like there's as much on, but there isn't, there's less on. And they just break really easily. I think some of these occasionally do if you're not careful with them, but on the whole, they're rather good. So I'll just change threads now, and I'll show you what nice effects you can get with these Natesh threads. I'll move the camera back a little bit so you can see a bit further afield. That's better, isn't it? So I'm just going to unravel my... This is one of their threads. It's one of my favourites. I use it instead of black all the time. I think it's called Night Sky. It's very, very dark blue, and a dark purple and a dark sort of greenish grey, which I love. So if I use one that has a good variant, my favourite one at the moment, I said that one was my favourite, but my favourite coloured one at the moment is this one. For those who are interested, I always take I have a similar system for my thread as I do for my wools. I have a little sheet with them all stitched on, but I always keep the inside label inside the thread, so when I run out I know what it is. And this is the name, Natesh, and it's number 538, which I like very much. It's a sort of brown and yellowy gold. So I'm going to put that in. Now because it's a lighter colour than the underneath thread, I think I'm going to change the underneath thread to a lighter colour, because sometimes the underneath thread shows on the top. Now, I'm not precious, I don't change it for exactly that colour, I just find the nearest thing I've got. So I'll thread up again. Oops. Oh, this isn't really a spectator sport, is it? No. There we are. Now put a different spooling underneath. I have my nice little spool holder here. Now, the only thing you have to be a bit more careful about, I think, is I said I didn't have exactly the same colours, but I do tend not to use cotton thread when I'm using this rayon thread on the top. So that's a bit like it. It might show in some areas, but never mind. I don't mind sometimes if I get a dotty line. Put the spool back in. And there we go. Right. So I'll get the thread up from the bottom. Then I'll put my, again, just as a reminder, down with this, into the fabric, back up again, and pull the underneath thread up. There we are. And hold the two threads just to the side while you start. Okay, lever down, needle in fabric, and off we go again. Now let's see, I hope that the green doesn't come up and show through. No, it doesn't. So you can do little filled in areas. And I like using these variegated threads because they really, you know, if you're careful with them, you can get to the point where you can use the areas, you know, to stitch. So I'll go in a bit as near as I dare, or as near as I can. So here I am, there's a bit of pale yellow coming down now, so I might want to do a pale yellow spot. So I'm going to go to the, oh, I shouldn't have done that, should I? I'm going to go to the top of my machine here, and while I'm stitching that, I'm going to turn the width control as I'm stitching. Not before I start, but as I'm stitching. And if I do that, I will get a little circle. So let's just show you that, or a curved shape. So as I'm stitching, I'm going to start stitching and then I'm turning the control to the right to get a thicker thread. But I'm gently moving the fabric very carefully and slowly. And then you can see there, I've got a little, that's the circle that I did just going round and round, and that's the little satin stitch circle that I just made by turning the control. Perhaps I'll do another one, I'll pan out a bit and do another one so that you can see. So in again, out again. It's always worth doing this properly, because you don't want a load of threads all over the place. Right, so I'll pan out again now. No, that's it, I've done it again, haven't I? So you can watch what I'm doing up at the side while I'm doing this stitching. So in with the needle, and I am actually moving this very gently towards me. So I'm turning that wheel at the top, so we're getting a brown one this time, and it's going off to golden, and oops, I've gone a bit too far there, and there we are, a little satin stitch block. I'll put that up near the camera again in a minute. You can see that little satin stitch block there. I use that quite a lot in my work. What else can we do? If you did put the down into the fabric, up, just pull the bottom thread through. You can see that green thread isn't showing through. It's light enough not to be noticed. If you were doing, you could do little straight lines. Quite a nice little technique to do. A line. Make sure your needle's up before you start doing any width control changes. Put the width control to its widest. Move the fabric gently, and then you get a little rectangle. Or perhaps it would be a bar if you wanted it to be. Don't forget, don't have your needle in when you're trying to adjust the width. Has to be out. Back to 0. Width. Out. Across. And so on. And then we've got, I can do some more of those little, just a slowly changing as you're going along. And in. Moving the width out again. In again. So, you have to be careful when you get near the edge of the hoop, obviously. So there's lots of fiddling about there just to get you practiced. I'll just hold it up to the machine for you, just to get you practiced, get you started. Stitching on felt is an altogether different thing, which I think I might tackle in the next lesson. I think it's better that you become really proficient at machine embroidery before you start on your felt, because your felt is a very different thing. I'll talk about that later, except that I have got a little piece here just to whet your appetite. This is a piece of felt I made a lot of. I'll just turn the light off there now. I don't know whether it gives a better view of the colours. It's almost like a carnival mask, isn't it? But it was just a little bit of felt I made in the days when I wasn't very good at making felt. And it was just 2 circly bits, and it was quite a thick blobby bit of felt. But you can see here, it was a long time ago, you can see here where I've not put any hand stitch on this, it's all machine embroidery. And it's got, wherever there isn't any machine embroidery, you get a rather nice relief there. But machine embroidery is a wonderful thing. It was the great revelation to me, really, because I always wanted to have quick results. And I'm just going to show you now some pieces of work that I made using machine embroidery onto silk papers that I made. So I'll get them out onto the kitchen table now. And here we are. Lots and lots of machine embroidery, because I told you that last time that I like 1950s designs and patterns, and here are some little motifs that you can practice. I rather like these little across that way and that way, just with a straight stitch. They gave me that feeling of 1950s bark cloth fabrics. And then some little radial patterns here. And there's that's another of those across and down, cross hatching sort of stitches. And I really had fun with that, with a lot of stitching and a lot of this silk paper. That's made, I told you once before, that's made in the same way that you make felt, but instead of just shrinking it, you have to actually add an adhesive because it doesn't shrink together. You can put the thick silk fibres onto felt afterwards, and I have just received some beautiful fibres from at the Thread Studio in Perth. She had a piece of my work in, I sent it for an exhibition, but unfortunately the post let us down and it didn't arrive in time. She returned it to me and it came back yesterday, and it was full of the most lovely fibres called slushies, which I'm really excited about trying to use. And they have silk and wool together. So another 1950s themed piece with the atomic theme. Remember Festival of Britain? Well, I don't actually remember it because I was only 1. No, I was 0 actually. But these little atomic sort of shapes that were very popular then. And I think they must have carried on into my childhood because I've sort of absorbed them. But here you can see where I've done some of these zigzag squares that I was showing you. And because I've used that variegated fibre, it's a really nice one, my favourite. The whole roll or the whole spool has sort of lime green, turquoise, very soft green. And it's a really nice thread to use. On that one there, I just used all the same thread. But I really like that aqua one. I'll show it to you. Just bear with me a second. I'm going to get it off my fallen over thing. It's that one. Oh, and I can... Now, after all I said, I don't think I can give you the number. I think I took it out to check what it was the other day. Anyway, it's there. And another one here. This was the first one that I did in this 1950s style. And I'm showing you these because they relate more to machine embroidery. And now this one has threads that are a bit more of a challenge in it. I don't know if you can see these thickish woolly threads, which are actually really nice for stitching on felt, but they are quite a trial in your machine. They don't really behave very well, and they're a bit reluctant to go through, but they do work. They work enough to use a little bit. So it's the orange in the middle of that, and they're woolen, and they're called Burmilana, and they're Madeira threads, but Madeira don't make the Burmilana anymore, but they do another one that's similar with a name like Lane or something. I'm not sure, but I'm sure if you had a look in the Madeira catalogue, you'd be able to see. So you can see here, they're very woolly, and they would be nice on felt. I actually sometimes just stitch with an ordinary needle onto felt with those because they're quite a nice soft thread. So I've used them around the outside of these little bits of other machine embroidery there, and now and again I've changed from silky to wool, and I quite like those. And finally, another one. This is a bit vibrant, isn't it? I don't know if I did use... Oh yes, I used the Burmilana here. This pale green is Burmilana. And then I've filled in with other greens. And I think I must have had a different... oh no, I haven't had a different colour under it. It's just that I haven't filled in very thickly so that you can still see the pink underneath of the silk paper. And that's a Burmilana one as well, that pink. So there's plenty of scope there for you to have a practice and a play with machine embroidery. And I hope that you will show your samples and examples on the Flickr page as well, because we all need to see each other's tryouts, don't we, and each other's mistakes, and don't worry too much about things not being absolutely spot on, because some of your felts are just gorgeous, and I'm really excited to get stitching on my pieces that I made, but I'm having to hold back and resist until next time. And next time we'll look at stitching with your machine onto felt. Thanks for watching. Bye.